The morning sun cast long shadows across the Murtala Muhammad International Airport in Lagos. As Minister of Aviation, Hadi Sirika stepped out of his black Mercedes. His phone had been buzzing nonstop since dawn with calls from Beijing, Brussels, and Washington. The biggest aviation deal in Africa's history was about to unfold, and Nigeria sat at the center of a fierce international competition. 3 months earlier, President Bola Tinubu had made a bold announcement that shocked the aviation world. Nigeria would modernize its entire air transportation system within 5 years, replacing aging aircraft, upgrading airports, and establishing new flight routes across West Africa. The project carried a price tag of $12 billion, making it the largest aviation investment on the continent since Egypt's new administrative capital airport. Word of Nigeria's ambitious plans spread quickly through international business circles. Within weeks, delegations from China's Comac, Europe's Airbus, and America's Boeing were scheduling meetings in Abuja. Each company saw an opportunity to establish a foothold in Africa's most populous nation and potentially influence aviation decisions across the entire continent. The Chinese delegation arrived first, led by Zhang Wei, a seasoned negotiator who had closed similar deals in Kenya and Ethiopia. Zhang understood that Nigeria represented more than just aircraft sales. Success here could open doors to Ghana, Senegal, and other West African nations looking to modernize their fleets. His team brought proposals for not just planes, but complete infrastructure packages including pilot training, maintenance facilities, and financing options that seemed almost too good to be true. European representatives arrived 2 days later, confident in their technological superiority and long-standing relationships with Nigerian airlines. Airbus had supplied aircraft to Nigeria for decades, and their team emphasized reliability, fuel efficiency, and proven track records. They highlighted their experience with tropical weather conditions and the specific challenges of African aviation markets. Behind closed doors in the presidential villa, urgent discussions were taking place. Economic advisors presented charts showing Nigeria's growing middle class and increasing demand for air travel. Transportation experts explained how modern aircraft could reduce flight times between Lagos and Abuja from 90 minutes to 60, potentially transforming business operations across the country. But the decision carried implications far beyond economics. Intelligence reports suggested that accepting Chinese aircraft could complicate Nigeria's relationships with Western allies. European diplomats hinted at preferential trade agreements if Airbus received the contract. American officials spoke privately about security, concerns, and the importance of maintaining strategic partnerships in an increasingly complex global environment. Minister Sirika found himself at the center of negotiations that would reshape Nigeria's position in international aviation. His engineering background helped him understand technical specifications, but the political dimensions of the decision weighed heavily on his mind. Every meeting, every proposal, every handshake carried consequences that could influence Nigeria's foreign relations for decades to come. Airlines across Nigeria watched the developments with keen interest. Domestic carriers like Air Peace and Asman Air had been operating aging fleets, some with aircraft over 20 years old. International routes remained dominated by foreign airlines, partly because Nigerian carriers lacked modern, fuel-efficient planes capable of long-haul flights to Europe, Asia, and the Americas. The stakes extended beyond Nigeria's borders. Success in Lagos could provide the winning company with a showcase for their technology in Africa's largest economy. Other African nations were watching closely, knowing that Nigeria's choice might influence their own future aviation decisions. The ripple effects could determine which companies dominated African skies for the next generation. As negotiations intensified, local newspapers began reporting rumors and speculation about the pending decision. Business leaders debated the merits of different proposals in Lagos boardrooms. University aviation programs saw increased enrollment as young Nigerians anticipated new career opportunities in an expanded aviation sector. The competition was just beginning, and Minister Sirika knew that the coming weeks would test Nigeria's diplomatic skills as much as its aviation expertise. 3 global powers were preparing to make their final offers, each believing they held the key to Nigeria's aviation future. The conference room in Aso Rock Presidential Villa buzzed with tension as President Tinubu convened an emergency meeting of his economic advisors. Intelligence reports had revealed that the aviation decision was attracting attention from unexpected quarters. Russian officials had quietly approached Nigerian diplomats about participating in the bidding process, while Indian aircraft manufacturer HAL was exploring partnerships with local companies to present their own proposal. What began as a straightforward procurement process was evolving into a complex geopolitical chess match. European Union representatives had started linking the aviation deal to ongoing negotiations about Nigeria's participation in climate change initiatives. They suggested that choosing European aircraft with their superior fuel efficiency could strengthen Nigeria's position in international environmental discussions and potentially unlock green financing for other infrastructure projects. The Chinese delegation responded by expanding their offer even further. Jiang Wei announced that COMAC was prepared to establish an aircraft assembly facility in Nigeria, potentially creating 15,000 direct jobs and positioning the country as a manufacturing hub for West and Central Africa. The facility would assemble both passenger and cargo aircraft, with Nigerian workers trained in Shanghai and Harbin to master advanced manufacturing techniques. This announcement sent shockwaves through competing delegations. If Nigeria became a Chinese aircraft manufacturing base, it could influence aviation decisions across the entire region. Airlines in Ghana, Ivory Coast, Senegal, and other neighboring countries might choose Chinese aircraft simply because of proximity to parts and maintenance services in Nigeria. Boeing's response was swift and strategic. Sarah Martinez arranged for a delegation of African airline executives who used Boeing aircraft to visit Abuja and speak directly with Nigerian decision-makers. These executives shared their experiences with Boeing's global support network, emphasizing how American aircraft had helped them maintain international routes even during challenging periods like the COVID-19 pandemic. The Americans also began emphasizing security considerations more explicitly. They arranged briefings about cybersecurity features built into Boeing aircraft and suggested that Chinese aircraft might create vulnerabilities in Nigeria's aviation infrastructure. These concerns resonated with some Nigerian security officials who were already worried about protecting critical national infrastructure from potential cyber threats. European negotiators realized they needed to match the scale of Chinese infrastructure promises while maintaining their technological advantages. Airbus announced a partnership with French development agencies to provide technical assistance for airport modernization projects across Nigeria. They proposed establishing an African aviation training institute in Lagos that would attract students from across the continent and position Nigeria as a regional education hub. The domestic political dimensions of the decision were becoming increasingly complex. Northern Nigerian politicians favored proposals that included significant infrastructure development in their regions. Southern politicians were more interested in proposals that would enhance Lagos and Port Harcourt as international aviation gateways. Middle Belt representatives wanted assurances that any deal would include improvements to Abuja's airport facilities. Nigerian airline executives were growing impatient with the extended negotiations. Air Peace CEO Alan Onyema publicly stated that Nigerian carriers needed new aircraft immediately to remain competitive with foreign airlines operating in the country. He emphasized that delays in decision-making were costing Nigerian aviation companies millions of dollars in lost revenue and market share to international competitors. The media coverage intensified as journalists began investigating the backgrounds and track records of companies involved in the bidding. Investigative reports examined Chinese aviation deals in other African countries, European aircraft performance in tropical conditions, and American aircraft safety records. Social media discussions became increasingly heated as different groups advocated for their preferred options. International pressure was also mounting from unexpected sources. World Bank officials expressed interest in financing portions of Nigeria's aviation modernization, but suggested that their participation might depend on transparent procurement processes and environmental impact assessments. International Monetary Fund representatives hinted that aviation infrastructure improvements could factor into future discussions about Nigeria's economic development programs. The competition took an unexpected turn when Turkey's Turkish aerospace industries announced their interest in participating in Nigeria's aviation modernization. Thai officials arrived in Lagos with proposals for their regional aircraft and suggested that Turkish companies could provide alternatives to the major powers competing for the contract. This development forced existing bidders to reassess their strategies and consider whether the competition was expanding beyond their control. Minister Sirika found himself managing not just technical evaluations of aircraft and infrastructure proposals, but complex diplomatic relationships that could influence Nigeria's international standing for decades. He realized that the aviation decision had become a test of Nigeria's ability to navigate great power competition while maximizing benefits for its own citizens. The stakes were rising with each passing day, and pressure was building toward a decision that would reshape not just Nigerian aviation, but the entire landscape of international competition in Africa's largest economy. The situation reached a critical juncture when President Tinubu received a confidential intelligence briefing that changed everything. Foreign intelligence agencies had been monitoring Nigeria's aviation negotiations with unprecedented interest, and their activities suggested that the decision carried implications far beyond aircraft procurement. The briefing revealed cyber attacks targeting Nigerian aviation infrastructure, suspicious activities around airports, and attempts to infiltrate government communications about the negotiations. Security concerns forced a temporary suspension of all meetings with foreign delegations while Nigerian intelligence services assessed potential threats. The pause allowed government officials to step back and analyze the full scope of what had begun as a straightforward aircraft purchasing decision but had evolved into a complex geopolitical challenge with far-reaching consequences for Nigeria's sovereignty and security. During the suspension, leaked documents revealed the true extent of international competition for Nigeria's aviation deal. Chinese banks had prepared financing packages worth over $20 billion, far exceeding the original $12 billion project scope. European governments had authorized unprecedented trade concessions and technology transfer agreements. American officials had discussed potential military cooperation agreements linked to civilian aircraft purchases. The leaks also revealed that several smaller countries were watching Nigeria's decision as a template for their own aviation development strategies. If Nigeria successfully negotiated favorable terms with major aircraft manufacturers, it could establish precedents that other developing countries could use in their own negotiations. The stakes had grown beyond Nigeria's borders to encompass the entire developing world's relationship with aerospace technology providers. Nigerian civil society organizations began demanding transparency in the decision-making process. Anti-corruption activists called for public hearings where all proposals would be evaluated openly. Professional associations of engineers and pilots organized seminars to educate the public about different aircraft technologies and their implications for Nigeria's aviation sector. The suspension period also allowed Nigerian negotiators to reassess their priorities and develop a more strategic approach. Economic advisors calculated the long-term costs and benefits of different proposals, considering not just aircraft prices but impacts on employment, technology transfer, and regional economic development. They realized that the decision would influence Nigeria's industrial development path for the next 50 years. International pressure intensified during the suspension as competing delegations worried that delays might favor their rivals. Chinese officials suggested that postponing decisions could result in higher prices due to inflation and supply chain pressures. European representatives warned that aircraft delivery slots were filling up, and delays could push Nigerian orders years into the future. Americans emphasized that security cooperation opportunities might not remain available indefinitely. The media coverage reached new levels of intensity as international journalists arrived in Lagos and Abuja to cover what had become a major global story. Financial markets began speculating about which companies would win the contracts, affecting stock prices of major aerospace manufacturers. Currency traders started positioning for potential impacts on the naira depending on which financing arrangements Nigeria might accept. A breakthrough came when Minister Sirika proposed a phased approach that would allow Nigeria to test different aircraft types and manufacturers before making final commitments. The first phase would involve smaller orders from multiple suppliers, allowing Nigerian airlines to evaluate performance, maintenance costs, and operational efficiency under real conditions. Subsequent phases would be based on actual performance data rather than manufacturer promises. This approach appealed to many stakeholders because it reduced risks while maintaining competition between suppliers. Airlines supported the strategy because it would provide them with operational experience before making large fleet commitments. International manufacturers reluctantly agreed because it offered them opportunities to prove their aircraft's capabilities in African conditions. However, the phased approach created new challenges. Mixing aircraft types would complicate pilot training, maintenance operations, and spare parts inventory management. Airlines worried about higher operational costs during the testing period. Manufacturers were concerned about making investments in Nigerian facilities and training programs without guarantees of large future orders. The complexity deepened when regional African partners requested participation in the phased testing program. Ghana, Senegal, and Kenya proposed joint evaluation programs that could provide more comprehensive data while reducing costs for all participating countries. The prospect of coordinated African aircraft evaluation and procurement could significantly shift bargaining power in favor of African countries. As the suspension period neared its end, all parties realized that Nigeria's final decision would establish important precedents for international technology cooperation, African economic integration, and the balance between security concerns and economic development opportunities. The choice would influence not just Nigeria's aviation sector, but the entire trajectory of African technological advancement and international relations. The pressure was building toward a resolution that would reshape the global aerospace industry's approach to emerging markets and establish new models for technology transfer and international cooperation in critical infrastructure sectors. Jiang Wei stood in his hotel suite overlooking Victoria Island, studying satellite images of Nigerian airports on his laptop. The Chinese delegation had spent 2 weeks conducting detailed assessments of Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, and Kano airports. Their findings revealed infrastructure challenges that perfectly aligned with China's strengths in large-scale construction and financing. The Chinese proposal was ambitious beyond anything Nigeria had seen before. COMAC offered not just their C919 narrow-body aircraft and ARJ-21 regional jets, but a complete transformation of Nigerian aviation. Their plan included building 3 new airports in underserved regions, expanding existing terminals, constructing aircraft maintenance facilities, and establishing a pilot training academy that could serve all of West Africa. Most surprisingly, the Chinese offered to finance 80% of the project through low-interest loans from the China Development Bank. Nigerian officials would only need to provide 20% upfront, with repayment terms stretched over 25 years. Chang explained how similar arrangements had helped Ethiopian Airlines become Africa's largest carrier and transformed Addis Ababa into a continental aviation hub. But the Chinese knew they faced skepticism about their aircraft technology. COMAC's planes were newer to the market compared to established Boeing and Airbus models. To address these concerns, they arranged for Minister Sirika and a technical team to visit Shanghai and personally inspect C919 production facilities. The visit was carefully orchestrated to showcase Chinese manufacturing capabilities and build confidence in their aviation technology. Meanwhile, the European delegation was implementing their own strategy. Airbus executives had been quietly meeting with Nigerian airline CEOs, emphasizing their aircraft's proven performance in African conditions. They highlighted how their A320neo family could help Nigerian carriers compete effectively on international routes, potentially capturing passengers who currently flew foreign airlines between Lagos and London, Paris, or Dubai. The European approach focused on partnerships rather than dominance. They proposed joint ventures between European and Nigerian companies for aircraft maintenance and pilot training. Airbus offered to establish a regional spare parts distribution center in Lagos that could serve airlines across West Africa, creating jobs and positioning Nigeria as a regional aviation service hub. European diplomats also played their cards carefully. During a private dinner at the French ambassador's residence, they discussed how the aviation deal could strengthen broader economic relationships. They mentioned ongoing negotiations for increased palm oil exports to Europe and suggested that aviation cooperation could facilitate smoother trade relationships across multiple sectors. American representatives took a different approach entirely. Boeing's team, led by experienced Africa specialist Sarah Martinez, focused on long-term strategic partnerships. They emphasized how Boeing aircraft had safely carried millions of passengers across Africa for decades and highlighted their extensive global maintenance network that could support Nigerian operations anywhere in the world. The Americans also brought military and security angles into their discussions. They pointed out how civilian aviation infrastructure could support humanitarian missions and peacekeeping operations across West Africa. Boeing officials mentioned their company's role in supporting NATO operations and suggested that standardizing on American aircraft could enhance Nigeria's participation in international security initiatives. Behind the official negotiations, each delegation was gathering intelligence about their competitors' offers. Chinese officials learned about European financing terms through contacts in Nigeria's banking sector. European representatives heard rumors about Chinese infrastructure promises from airport construction contractors. American intelligence networks provided insights into both Chinese and European negotiating strategies. The competition created unusual dynamics within Nigeria's government. Some officials favored the Chinese offer because of its comprehensive infrastructure development and attractive financing terms. Others preferred European technology and the continent's experience with African aviation markets. A smaller group advocated for American aircraft, emphasizing strategic relationships and proven reliability. Public opinion was also dividing along various lines. Nigerian business leaders who had positive experiences with Chinese infrastructure projects supported the COMAC proposal. Aviation professionals with European training backgrounds favored Airbus aircraft. Younger Nigerians, influenced by social media discussions about China's growing global influence, were split between excitement about modern Chinese technology and concerns about long-term debt obligations. The pressure was mounting on all sides as each delegation prepared for final presentations to Nigeria's National Economic Council. The Chinese had scheduled a video conference with successful African airlines using their aircraft. Europeans arranged for Airbus test pilots to demonstrate their latest technology at Lagos Airport. Americans planned to bring in Boeing executives who had managed previous deals with African governments. Minister Sirika realized that Nigeria's decision would send signals far beyond aviation circles. The choice would indicate Nigeria's preferred international partnerships in an era of shifting global power dynamics. As Africa's largest economy, Nigeria's aviation decision could influence similar choices across the continent for years to come. The final decision came not through a single dramatic announcement, but through a carefully orchestrated series of agreements that surprised everyone involved in the negotiations. President Tinubu had chosen a revolutionary approach that would reshape international aviation partnerships far beyond Nigeria's borders. Instead of selecting one primary supplier, Nigeria announced the creation of the African Aviation Consortium, a multinational framework that would coordinate aircraft procurement across multiple African countries. The consortium's first major decision was to implement a diversified procurement strategy that would prevent dependence on any single supplier while maximizing competition and technology transfer opportunities. Nigeria would purchase aircraft from all major manufacturers, but through coordinated orders with other African countries that would strengthen collective bargaining power and create regional economies of scale in training, maintenance, and operations. Under the new framework, Nigeria committed to purchasing 30 Chinese C919 aircraft, 25 European Airbus A320neo planes, and 15 American Boeing 737 MAX aircraft over the next 5 years. More importantly, each order came with specific requirements for technology transfer, local assembly operations, and training programs that would build African aerospace capabilities. Rather than simply importing finished products, the Chinese agreement included establishing an aircraft assembly facility in Lagos that would serve West and Central Africa. However, unlike typical Chinese infrastructure projects, this facility would be jointly owned by Nigerian, Ghanaian, and Ivorian companies, with Chinese partners holding minority stakes. The agreement required training African engineers in China and gradually transferring assembly technologies to African partners over a 10-year period. European manufacturers agreed to establish a regional maintenance and training center in Lagos that would serve airlines across Africa. The facility would be operated jointly by European and Nigerian companies, with Nigerian partners gaining majority control after 15 years. European governments also committed to preferential trade agreements for Nigerian palm oil, cocoa, and other agricultural exports as part of the broader economic partnership. The American agreement focused on advanced avionics and safety systems, with Boeing establishing a regional spare parts distribution center in Nigeria. American partners also agreed to provide cybersecurity support for Nigerian aviation infrastructure and include Nigerian companies in global aerospace supply chains for specific components that could be manufactured competitively in Africa. The breakthrough came when Nigeria convinced other African countries to coordinate their aircraft orders through the consortium framework. Ghana, Senegal, Kenya, and Ethiopia agreed to align their procurement schedules with Nigeria's orders, creating combined purchases large enough to demand significant concessions from international suppliers. The coordinated approach gave African countries collective bargaining power that individual nations could never achieve alone. International reactions to Nigeria's consortium approach were mixed, but ultimately accepting. Aircraft manufacturers realized that coordinated African procurement could become a global trend, requiring them to develop new strategies for engaging with emerging markets. Chinese officials praised the approach as an example of South-South cooperation, while European and American competitors adapted their African strategies to work within the consortium framework. The most significant long-term impact was the establishment of technology transfer requirements that would gradually build African aerospace manufacturing capabilities. Over 20 years, the consortium agreements would transfer technologies for aircraft assembly, engine maintenance, avionics systems, and pilot training to African partners. The goal was to position Africa as a global aerospace manufacturing region, rather than merely a market for foreign products. Nigerian airlines began receiving their first new aircraft within 18 months, with dramatic improvements in operational efficiency and passenger comfort. The diversity of aircraft types created some initial complexity, but also provided Nigerian aviation professionals with broader experience across different technologies and systems. Regional routes expanded as new aircraft enabled previously uneconomical connections between African cities. The consortium approach had unexpected diplomatic benefits as well. Nigeria's leadership in coordinating African aviation procurement strengthened its position in continental organizations and enhanced its influence in international forums. The success of aviation cooperation encouraged similar approaches in other sectors, including telecommunications, renewable energy, and transportation infrastructure. 5 years after the initial negotiations began, Nigeria had not only modernized its aviation sector, but had established new models for international cooperation that were being studied and replicated in other regions. The country had successfully navigated great power competition while advancing its own interests and strengthening African economic integration. The final outcome exceeded everyone's initial expectations. Nigeria secured advanced aircraft technologies from multiple sources, built domestic aerospace capabilities, strengthened regional partnerships, and established itself as a leader in innovative approaches to international technology cooperation. The aviation sector had become a catalyst for broader economic transformation and a symbol of Africa's growing ability to shape its own technological future. Minister Sirika, reflecting on the complex negotiation process, realized that Nigeria's greatest success had been transforming a competitive procurement process into a collaborative framework that advanced multiple African countries' interests while maintaining positive relationships with all major international partners. The approach had proven that developing countries could successfully navigate complex international competitions while building their own technological capabilities and strengthening regional cooperation. The atmosphere in Lagos changed dramatically when news leaked that Nigeria was considering a radical fourth option, developing its own indigenous aircraft manufacturing capability through strategic partnerships with multiple countries. The leak came from an anonymous source within the Ministry of Aviation and sent shockwaves through all the international delegations who had been competing for exclusive deals. Dr. Amina Hassan, Nigeria's Minister of Science and Technology, had been quietly working with local engineering firms and universities to assess the feasibility of establishing domestic aircraft production. Her team had identified Nigerian engineers working at Boeing, Airbus, and other international aerospace companies who might return home if offered opportunities to build aircraft in their own country. The indigenous aircraft proposal suggested partnering with different countries for different components. Nigeria could source engines from European manufacturers, avionics systems from American companies, and fuselage manufacturing technology from Chinese partners. This approach would prevent dependence on any single foreign power while building Nigerian technical expertise across multiple aerospace technologies. International delegations scrambled to respond to this unexpected development. Jiang Wei immediately proposed modifying the Chinese offer to include more Nigerian participation in aircraft assembly and component manufacturing. He suggested that COMAC could establish joint ventures with Nigerian companies, gradually transferring technology and building local capabilities over time. European representatives took a different approach, emphasizing the complexity of aircraft manufacturing and questioning whether Nigeria had sufficient industrial infrastructure to support such ambitious plans. They argued that partnership agreements with established manufacturers would be more practical and cost-effective than attempting to build indigenous capabilities from scratch. Boeing's team focused on the safety and certification challenges of developing new aircraft manufacturing capabilities. Sarah Martinez arranged for meetings with Nigerian aviation regulators to discuss international certification requirements and the extensive testing needed for any new aircraft design or manufacturing process. She emphasized the decades of experience required to build safe, reliable aircraft that could compete in international markets. The domestic response to the indigenous aircraft proposal was mixed but enthusiastic among many Nigerians. University engineering students organized rallies supporting local aircraft production, seeing it as an opportunity to build high-tech careers without emigrating to other countries. Labor unions endorsed the concept, anticipating thousands of skilled manufacturing jobs that could transform Nigeria's industrial base. However, practical challenges quickly emerged. Nigeria's power grid remained unreliable, potentially affecting precision manufacturing processes. The country lacked specialized suppliers for aircraft-grade materials and components. Most critically, developing indigenous aircraft would require massive investments in testing facilities, certification processes, and quality control systems that could take decades to establish. Foreign investors began expressing concerns about the uncertainty surrounding Nigeria's aviation plans. Airlines that had been planning to expand their Nigerian operations postponed aircraft orders until the government clarified its procurement strategy. International aviation finance companies warned that mixed procurement approaches could complicate maintenance, training, and operational efficiency for Nigerian carriers. The complexity increased when South African aircraft manufacturer Denel approached Nigerian officials about potential cooperation in developing regional aircraft suited for African conditions. Brazilian manufacturer Embraer also expressed interest in establishing partnerships with Nigerian companies to serve West African markets. The number of potential partners was expanding beyond the original three major competitors. Regional implications became more significant as other African countries watched Nigeria's decision-making process. Ghana announced that it would coordinate its own aviation procurement with Nigeria's choices to achieve economies of scale in training and maintenance. Ivory Coast suggested that West African countries could jointly negotiate with aircraft manufacturers to strengthen their bargaining positions. The African Union's Aviation Development Committee scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss regional coordination of aircraft procurement and manufacturing. They proposed creating a continental aircraft manufacturing consortium that could pool resources from multiple African countries and reduce dependence on external suppliers. Nigeria's size and industrial potential made it a natural leader for such initiatives. Chinese officials became concerned that Nigeria's hesitation might signal broader resistance to Chinese technology across Africa. They began exploring alternative strategies, including offers to support indigenous aircraft development through technology transfer agreements and low-interest financing for manufacturing facilities. The Chinese approach shifted from selling finished aircraft to helping Nigeria build its own aviation industry. European and American competitors responded by emphasizing the risks of technology transfer. Arrangements with Chinese companies. They suggested that accepting Chinese manufacturing technology could limit Nigeria's ability to collaborate with Western aerospace companies and potentially create security vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure. Systems Minister Sirika realized that the aviation decision had evolved far beyond choosing aircraft suppliers. Nigeria was now considering whether to maintain its current position as a consumer of foreign aerospace technology or attempt to become a producer of aircraft for African and global markets. The decision would determine Nigeria's role in global aerospace supply chains for generations to come. The pressure was intensifying from all directions as Nigeria approached a crossroads that would define not just its aviation future, but its position in the global technology economy.